we came up with a plan where we could, within about 2 minutes, have everything that we needed loaded up in the truck and be pulling out.
The Ready Life, into the country.
Howdy, I'm Nick Meisner, and I want to welcome you back to the Ready Life podcast, where you'll learn how to become as independent as possible for basic necessities like water, food, heat, and the power that so often makes these things work. I'd be willing to wager that a good number of you that are watching or listening to this podcast are probably not in the location where you want to end up for various reasons. And believe me, we've been there. I remember when we lived in town, and I remember that all too well. And there were times where it felt like kind of a helpless feeling, and you felt very vulnerable. And so we wanted to spend a little time discussing some things that you could do right now to put yourself in a better position. And, you know, yes, obviously one thing that you can do is to have the items that you need in your home for being able to, you know, hopefully have water, food, and heat. But beyond that, I know something that was heavy on our minds when we were in the situation that you may be in now is we wanted to come up with a way where we could get out if we needed to, and where we could get out quickly. I remember all too well the time, it was probably, 15 maybe, 14, 15, something like that. And it was Halloween, actually. And we were tuning into the shortwave radio, because that's how we got news. Even way back then, we weren't too fond of the mainstream media. And so that was a way that we would get news. And we were tuning into this shortwave broadcast, and they were talking about how everything was breaking loose. There were riots all over the place, and the banks had shut down, and stores were shutting down, power was going down, all kinds of stuff like this. And they said, and if this broadcast goes dead, you'll know what happened. And then in a few minutes, you could hear glass breaking in the background, and suddenly the broadcast went dead. And I'll never forget that sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, and just that feeling of, it's too late. What are we going to do? So that it turned out that that broadcast was a simulation of what could happen, and we had tuned in after the broadcast had already started. They'd made an announcement at the beginning of that this was a simulation or a dramatization of what could happen potentially. We didn't get that message, but I think it was providential, because that was a real wake-up call to us. Even though it was a false alarm and all of this, it gave us a little sneak peek of what it would be like to be in that kind of a situation. And we did our very best with what we could do to prepare. And if there's nothing else that you get from us and from the Ready Life podcast and everything, it's to do the best you can with what you have. And when you do the best that you can with what you've got, God will open the way for you to do that which you could not do. But He expects us to first do what we can do. And so we did that. And for us, it was assembling a bug-out kit where we could get out of Dodge, because for us, that was something that was really important. We didn't want to get stuck in that gated neighborhood with almost 2,000 homes in it. We did not want to be there when things came down, whatever that might be, whether it was a week-long power outage or civil unrest or what have you. We did not want to be there in that situation. So for us, we came up with a plan where we could, within about 2 minutes, have everything that we needed loaded up in the truck and be pulling out, because we knew that there might be a very limited amount of time that the roads were still open in a disaster or an emergency of some kind. And so for us, that's where trunks like this came in, is we assembled everything that we believed we would need in order to, survive to some extent in a situation, in a difficult situation, and we packed it all in trunks. We had heavier duty trunks than this at the time, but it doesn't have to be. These are just some cheap ones from Costco. And it's just a container. You figure out how many trunks will fit in your vehicle. And of course, with a pickup truck, you've got a lot more space to work with. And that's what we were working with. But it's okay if you don't have a pickup truck. Just whatever you've got to work with, figure out what kind of space you have to work with and find containers that will fit in that space, how many of those containers will fit, and then that's what you have to work with. And then you can work through it ahead of time while in a time of relative peace. You can sort through it and say, and weigh what are your priorities here? What are the items that you must have and what are the things that you could live without? And then you can get those packed and then have it ready to go, where they're stacked in a closet or wherever, and it's ready to go. And in a matter of 2 minutes, you can grab those trunks, throw them in the vehicle, and be gone, and know that you have what you need. And so, what kind of stuff would we be talking about? Well, for one thing, if you're in that kind of a situation, I know when we were in that kind of a situation, we were thinking about, it looked a lot like camping stuff. We would have sleeping bags and maybe a tent and some first aid stuff and things like this. Things that you would need. We were just trying to think of what would we need to be able to survive, because we didn't really have a good place to go. We had some family that were in a remote area, and so we might try to make it there, but we knew that was kind of a long shot because it was the other side of the country. And so it was like, what do we need to make it while we're on this journey if there was no power and, things like this. So that's also food, water, water filter. This is by no means a complete thing. I'm just giving you a little sampling of the kinds of things that we included in our kit. And it's going to be different for each person. Your medical kit is going to be different. Maybe you have some things, some meds that you have to survive, and something like that should be included. Or maybe you wear contacts, and that's like a primary means of you don't do well with glasses. Then you might want to have a supply of contacts and solution in there, or what have you. But just be thinking through, what would it take? And a good place to start is to go on a camping trip and see what you need to live on that camping trip. And that's a really good start, because that could be the kind of situation that you're in. For us, we were thinking we might have to camp in the woods and live there for a while things calm down, or whatever. We just wanted to have options. We didn't know what the situation would look like, and we wanted to have options. So that's where this came in. But having said that, what your bug out kit will look like is going to be different for everybody depending upon your situation. Our bug out kit now is going to look very different than it did back then, because now we're in a location where we'd kind of like to end up. So if there was a large scale power outage, or for long-term power outage or something like this, barring some unforeseen circumstances, I don't think I'd want to be necessarily going anywhere. And this is kind of where I'd want to be. And so we wouldn't be bugging out in that kind of a scenario, but we might be bugging out in a very different kind of scenario. And we faced this a few years ago when there was a large wildland fire near us. And so when that happened, we assembled a bug out kit. But it looked very different than this. We were not in that kind of a situation. We weren't thinking about what would we have to have in order to survive in the woods and all of this kind of thing. We were thinking of what are the irreplaceable items in our home that we could not replace, that we would be just, it would be terrible to lose and we would never be able to replace them. Most things you can replace with money, and hopefully you're going to get some insurance if a fire burns your property and house down. But some things cannot be replaced no matter how much money that is. For instance, I'll show you one type of thing that was in our bug out kit in that type of situation, a photo album or a scrapbook with family history and things like this. You know, that might seem trivial to someone in the city who's planning a bug out kit to get out of town, and I totally get that, because when we were in town and assembling our bug out kit, it did not include photo albums and things like that. We were just looking at what do we need to survive. But what I'm saying is our bug out kit in this kind of a situation is very different. It's what are the irreplaceable items, and so different situations are going to look different. But I really like this system, and that was kind of the point that I really want you to take home from this episode, is having containers, designated containers, put your stuff in ahead of time that you're going to need, and then leave it there. Because then, in just a moment's notice, you could throw those in your vehicle and be gone, and you're going to have what you need. Because if you've ever tried pulling all this stuff together while you're in a hurry, especially under intense pressure, it's not going to happen. And it's just not going to work. Either it's going to take too long, or you're going to forget stuff, or both. So plan ahead, have your containers, get them stocked, get them ready. Another thing that you might consider is if you had a designated spot, some family, or maybe a piece of property that you haven't developed yet or something like that, and it's some distance away, you might look for options for planting a little stash of stuff, whether it's freeze-dried food or, in a water filter and just some basic stuff, planting it partway there so that if you had to get out of town with just the shirt on your back, you could go to that spot and unearth it and have some basic essentials. That's another form of a bug out kit that you might consider. So anyhow, I hope this is super helpful to you in assembling your bug out kit so that you are in a position to be prepared and not have to scramble under pressure. That's really what this is all about, is using a time of relative peace. Like King Asa in the Bible, he had a time of relative peace and he used that to prepare. And because he did that, when a time of crisis came, he was in a much better position and God helped him through it. And that's what we're talking about here, is do the best that you can with the situation that you're in. So I hope you're able to do that, and we'll see you next week.